Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics at Mid-America Christian University. I'm here with the next in our interviewing series, our strategic interviewing series, a form of professional development, if you will, for COM 4603, Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements. We've had a tremendous class thus far. I think one of the dynamic aspects of it is that we're getting to blend students from various majors, and that's a really exciting potentiality every time you get a chance to converge disciplines. And so it's traditionally a course we offer for our comm or communication majors, but we're extremely excited to have so many from our digital marketing group cohort with us in this class. And we're looking forward to other majors joining us in the future, right? Whether it's data analytics or who knows what, we're excited. But joining me today is, let's call it a Hall of Famer here, right? We'll put it in Dr. G's Hall of Fame, a really exclusive club. Is a podcast producer and writer out in Los Angeles, and she's got an exciting resume, so dynamic, so many amazing projects that hopefully we'll get to hear more about, learn about, and plenty of takeaways for our students based on their submitted questions in advance. And so I'm excited to have with us Leah Sutherland. Leah, thank you for joining us on this, spring afternoon.
Oh my God, what a robust introduction. That was amazing. Thank you for having me. So happy to talk to you always and forever.
Awesome. We've been, tackling various mediums and professions, and I think it's really benefited, especially the blend of cohorts, because we have students that are developing their professional skills and they're headed in different directions. And I think I'm an advocate of always shining a spotlight on the values that are presented in the humanities and with the humanities-based degree that don't get highlighted when too often they can be stigmatized, right? And I think that's not to go all InfoWars on us, but there are these misnomers, and really I think something important that we're gaining through this series is that each speaker is giving us different avenues of expertise, right? And so you kind of represent a booming field for us in many ways, as a social outlet, as a hobby, but also as a thriving, sub-industry in the media industry, in the entertainment industry. And that's going to be really exciting to hear about. And I think the students were really cued in with their questions. And while not all of them made it in on time, I am excited to run through the ones that we do have and potentially look for some chances to engage in maybe some of those written questions that were submitted beforehand. But before we get there, if you will, can you wind the clock back up and give us a little bit of a self-introduction? You're not necessarily a SoCal native, so where are you from, and what was your kind of path to getting at where you are today?
My phone went off. I'm going to turn that off. So background, that's been my ringtone since 2010 when I started college in South Carolina, and I could never, ever, ever change it because how would I know it's my phone now? It's been 10 years. I am so sorry about that. Like audio podcasting 101, tune off your phone. I was startled by it. So you'll see that reaction when you watch this back. So I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, originally. Went to the College of Charleston in South Carolina. At the very, very end of my collegiate career, and my brief flirtation with academia is where we met at a conference, actually a year after I had graduated, when I never, ever, ever thought I would see that paper ever again. And now here we are. I'm having to present at this conference, which was crazy. And now looking back, I for sure embarrassed myself. I would do it very differently this time. But it's been great because we've been chatting ever since. You've seen me move out to LA in 2015, kind of wandered around here for a while, always interested in writing, always interested in entertainment, accidentally got a job kind of production coordinating, researching for a podcast series. That series was called Hollywood and Crime. So also fitting in with our theme today, actually very noiry kind of show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And then that show got bought by a network. Then I started working for the network, the podcast network called Wondery. If you've heard of Dirty John, Dr. Death, any of those shows, that was a Wondery series. Shrink Next Door was a big one. Almost all of those have gone on to be TV projects now in development. And a couple months ago, I started working at Headspace, the meditation app. They started a studio division. So now I work for a studio at a tech company instead of a network. Very like, now we're getting like inside Hollywood and how that functions.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been at that studio for 3-4 months. 5 months, whatever. Time is meaningless right now. I can't remember what day it is. It's Friday.
Sounds like you need a mental health day, right?
Yeah, I'm on a mental health day today. So really, truly, what's happening right now? My mind is everywhere else, healing itself. And we released our first show as Headspace Studios, first podcast series, this past Monday. It's called Radio Headspace. It was interesting what you were saying about podcasts and the kind of wind up. This show kind of flirts between a marketing tool, like really high level branded content, but designed to be presented in a way that is entirely digestible, short form. It's 5 minutes or less every episode.
Really?
Yes, it's designed to be integrated into somebody's daily routine without much, asking of them. So it's like partially like really high level branded content, but designed to sound in no way like any sort of advertisement. There are no calls to action to go check out the app. There's nothing else. So it kind of bridges that gap between like what's an ad, what type of content is created to serve a specific marketing purpose, and then what type of content exists as its own thing in its own right. So that wind up to podcast is interesting because I think you're right. And it does all three of those things as like a marketing tool, as a personal journal diary, and then as like an art piece, almost cinematic kind of quality for its own thing.
This is really intriguing. And I almost want to jump in with my own follow-up question here because who would you describe is the demographic for the 5 minute variety that you're currently working on?
Yeah, the 5 minute. So the term is like a microcast, and that's the official industry term, which is a very short podcast. Usually the kind of window is 3 to 5 minutes is what we're shooting for. The audience for this is on first tier, I think, is anybody concerned with their mental health and wellness right now, because we're all home and kind of dealing with these huge world circumstances, kind of everybody, but somebody who is already kind of like into wellness, into fitness, wants to take care of themselves, wants to take care of their mental health, or at least interested in that. So somebody who's looking at self-improvement. That's kind of our first tier of like audience demographics. Second tier would be people who already are Headspace fans. So people who meditate, people who use our product already. Here's another thing that they can get. Third tier would probably just be anybody who wants something to put on first thing in the morning instead of looking at their phone and scrolling through TikTok for an hour, which is what I did today instead.
It's hard to get off once you get on, right?
I love it. But I scrolled for so long last night, probably this morning it was probably 20 minutes. Last night I actually scrolled for like an hour, and I ran into a video. And by the way, I think TikTok is the superior social platform. I stand by it. I scrolled long enough where I got a TikTok ad where some guy made a video and he was like, hey, you've been scrolling for a really long time. Do you want to keep going? Maybe take a break. And I was like, you're right, man. I do need to get off and take a break and go to bed. So that was great. I like they're building that in.
Yeah, exactly. And we can certainly go off down that dark alley of TikTok. I've been making lots of TikTok jokes on our discussion boards and in various classroom settings. And I get a hit and miss reaction, right? If it's live in person, it's a funny reaction because students get a guilty look on their face, like, you're on there, don't look for me.
Yeah, for sure.
but then others, it might be like the wave just hasn't hit them yet, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
But okay, let's jump over. I want to have plenty of time to hear from those that were able to submit on a very short turnaround week for us. And I think I want to begin with, let's see, Rebecca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Cummins, and I am a senior here at MACU. My first question is, could you describe the major differences between being a freelancer and working for a large company like Headspace?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I can. And I sold out to the man and got a job at a company full time 3 years ago now. It was spring 2017. I'd freelanced for 2 years before that, doing like copywriting, doing social media management, doing this kind of like side audio production, which is kind of the path that I ended up going down. I think the main difference is like, do you want to control your time or do you want somebody else to structure it for you?
Mm-hmm.
I am not somebody who's like oriented towards structure usually. I don't love it. I don't love routines, and I'm working on that. But I really wanted somebody to kind of provide that structure for me, which is why I went with the job. But kind of on the flip side of that is there are bigger opportunities and more access to just like resources, IP, people, stuff like professional gear. There was a recording studio that I got to access every single day whenever I needed to, that I would not have had access to on my own. So it's kind of like full creative freedom, full, freedom of your life to structure and schedule it however you want, versus access was the big difference for me. And then of course, a little more stability and security with like knowing exactly where my money's coming from, all that stuff. So that was the main difference for me.
You remind me of, a popularized term by many, across, whether we're talking about social influencers or maybe even professional journalists today, right? And that is like having quote unquote multiple revenue streams,
Yeah.
right? It's very much an increasing norm in the 21st century, and so what you gain as a freelancer isn't maybe an opportunity to be that kind of bounty hunter for creative ideas and projects, but there is absolutely, and we joke and we jest, it's certainly not no longer viable to say someone's selling out when we have realistic economic constraints, and it's good to have something like health insurance or life insurance, or
Sure.
Those benefits that come with being able to kind of commit ourselves to a singular organization, or at least give them a sort of full-time duties.
Right. I mean, I think kind of related to that is I am not interested in monetizing my hobbies. I'm not interested in kind of finding all those opportunities. I'm really not an excellent bounty hunter in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really interested in that at all. Like I'm not looking to like do sponsored posts on social media or like even try to get that many followers to do that. That's not what I'm about. So I like having the kind of like one source of income, which allows me complete freedom and ability of creativity, complete control over all my creative hobbies, because I do a lot of writing on the side. I do a lot of friends' side podcast or producing like stage stuff on the side. And I wanted total freedom over that and a non-reliance on that to bring me any sort of money, because I don't believe in making your creativity provide for you, especially not at the beginning of careers. Like you can't, it's so much added stress, I think, to like hang your life on that. So that's the other thing that like taking a full-time job did for me, was free up all that space.
You mentioned side hobbies and personal interests like stage stuff, quote unquote. And I've teased the class that as a kind of alternative to graduate school, you were part of an improv school, and I've been a big advocate of these kinds of routes that can have enormous payoff, and I think it has for you. I know we're interested to hear more about that, but I believe Rebecca's next question is kind of a follow-up that continues the theme of linking things together.
My second question is, what category do you find most important when analyzing the success of a podcast?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank
I was
you.
confusing it with something else. We'll
Okay.
get to it. Do I need to replay it or?
Category that analyzing success of a podcast. So what makes something successful?
Yeah. How do you, in your roles that you've had,
yeah,
how close have you been to that data analytics side of things, or how does it guide you in making maybe creative decisions or financial decisions?
Totally. I mean, the business side of it is the podcast needs to be successful enough to ideally, when you sell ads against it, be able to like pay for itself or cover some of the production costs. I mean, there's a ton of other added benefits of like brand awareness or some kind of specific marketing campaign. It kind of depends on the point of the podcast. Mm-hmm. But in terms of my roles, I've primarily been in the category of podcasts that exist in their own right as in the medium specifically. So a show that is kind of like more, I specialize in long form narrative, like creative nonfiction, literary journalism, if you will, without journalism, because I'm not a journalist, nor do I claim to be. But something that is kind of more of a documentary or documented miniseries where we go conduct field interviews with real people, collect those stories, come back, clean them up, put them out. So that is something that is like audio for the sake of audio. I'm creating this piece as a work, as a show that should only exist as a podcast. It's not a marketing tool. It's not something to bridge the gap because I couldn't make it into a TV show. So I decided to like test it out as a podcast. So the types of stuff I'm making fall into that category of podcast as art, audio as art in its own right. Mm-hmm. So kind of the first metric for me within that is this a good story? Is this a good piece that I'm proud of, that I would listen to? So that's kind of metric number one. And that's a really subjective, it's going to be different everywhere, different styles, but it's like, you got to enjoy the thing you're making. And then after that, kind of specific data metrics is how many people downloaded this. There's 1 million shows, podcast series that exist in the world, at least on Apple Podcasts, which means there's around 30 million episodes of podcasts that exist. Mm-hmm. Of that, most of them will never, ever even get into the top 50% of all shows. The shows that I work on are within the top 10 to 1% of all podcasts in existence, which is kind of crazy to think about. My whole career has only been hit shows within the top 50 of all shows on Apple Podcasts, including the one I just launched on Monday. It's hovering around number 7 or 8 right now in all podcasts. So I look at those metrics in terms of downloads to see where this falls out of all podcasts in existence on Apple Podcasts. So that's number one. And in terms of numbers, I guess, to get in the top 1%, your show has to clear 60,000 downloads per episode or so. So that's kind of the bar. Mm-hmm. There's more information on the internet. The other thing I look at is completion rate. So does somebody listen to the whole episode, and at what point do they drop off? So that's something that I look at, because it's like, okay, that means the person got bored or they thought their time was better spent elsewhere. What is happening in the content that I can go back to and point to and say, this was the problem, and do things differently next time? The third thing is just general reviews. Just what are people saying? Are they sharing? That kind of stuff. So this is a long answer to the question. But after I do my gut check, because I think I have good taste. I mean, that's the first part of your career anyway, is like cultivating your taste. Mm-hmm. So then I go back to like, what are people saying? And you take all that information in, that's good to know. But if it doesn't align with your taste and the stuff you're trying to make, it's not useful to you at all. So you have to kind of marry these two things. So that's kind of, I think, more where the art of the data comes in, is like, what is actually like viable feedback and well-warranted criticism of this thing that I can fix? And then what's somebody just hating to hate?
When you talk about having an ear for what people are talking about, what they're into, what is moving in terms of trends and things. It sounds a lot like human communication, and your undergraduate degree was in communication, right?
Yep.
Sometimes that field can get beat up a little bit because it's kind of opaque in a way, but what people don't realize is there are so many subspecializations within communication studies, and certainly you're finding ways to apply arguably elements of that degree pursuit.
Yeah, I mean, I studied more specifically, I did media, which is how we met, but I also spent a lot of time in interpersonal communication courses. Mm-hmm. And I use both of those things. Audio is such an intimate medium, and people share podcasts with each other. You put it directly into your brain. You usually consume it alone. And it's so intimate. So it's like, how are people talking about this? And with, you feel like the hosts of these shows, which is not like two-way, but it's very directly like, I'm talking to you specifically. So I do kind of go back to like interpersonal and like, why are we saying these things? How are we saying them? In what tone? And then also the media side, I think, helped cultivate my taste. So absolutely, I use both of those in my everyday.
We've been in a unique situation over the last few months. We so much of the U.S. economy, if not other parts of the world, have shifted to a lot of remote work. We've also seen these dramatic, historical even increases in unemployment, this kind of thing. One of the more casual threads that I picked up on, maybe scrolling Twitter or something, from the kind of intellectual community, but I immediately gravitated toward was someone that was maybe a media critic or something like that had tweeted that they didn't anticipate how suddenly how suddenly their podcast intake would dramatically decline now that they're no longer commuting.
Yeah.
And it struck a chord with me because I enjoy using that kind of space to kind of sample texts and kind of take in different stories and stuff, but it very much is related to either that kind of passive listening as I'm doing other duties, maybe getting ready in the morning, but also activities like commuting or maybe like in between during a lunch break, something like that. And there has been a personal decline in usage. Doesn't mean I'm walking away from it. It means that schedules have altered dramatically. I can't help but notice how a 5-minute type of program really satisfies that shift in certain ways, right? There is the space for that within like the home, not needing to have to run an errand to get it in.
Yeah, I think that was also like microcasts were slated to be the big trend of 2020 in podcasting. Uh-huh. Part of that is with the increase of Spotify as your primary consumption tool versus Apple Podcasts. Spotify has these algorithm-based playlists that curates music for people, but they also do mixtures of music and podcasts. So the shorter form content fits more specifically into those curation playlists, because it's really jarring to go from a 3-minute song to a 20-minute episode. If I can spend 3 minutes here, 3 minutes in audio, just VO, and then 3 minutes back in music, easy. So those two things are absolutely related.
We're reinventing the wheel here. This is I'm reminded of the heyday of the radio DJ, and how the savviest ones could fit these micro monologues into the segment breaks, and it was a part of culture, right? And while this precedes my my time on Earth, I'm in this conversation of nostalgia. I can't help but think about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and sort of like Tarantino bakes in this through line of like the diegetic sound of that era, right? So it's not just about the visual, it's the sound of it. And after having sampled that film a couple of times, I've sampled the soundtrack, and the soundtrack has all of those vintage ads built in, and it's one of my favorite things.
Great.
They're not the kind of ad that pop like and give me direct experience, but they immerse me in the world. And it's not just the ads, it's like the cut-ins with the DJs, which was a part of radio culture, which has largely diminished. And we have moved more toward radio monoculture. And I think that's why podcasts are so successful and we're so hungry for them, is they are giving that sense of individuality at a time where kind of corporate convergence is taking away regionality, distinction, difference in voice, right? Who's kind of controlling that microphone. So that's an exciting trend to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, it's really great. And I love small podcasts. And in a way, I am largely responsible for the dominance of these bigger kind of like coastal controlled shows. Like I've made those shows. So there is also like, I almost never listen to those shows, and I never listen to big podcasts usually, because like I don't know. There's not enough room, I think, for a lot of the smaller ones to succeed. They're not being allowed to thrive, which is sad, but it is also amazing that they exist.
Absolutely. We have some other voices we want to hear from. Speaking of all these voices.
Hi, Miss Sutherland. My name is Hayley Hutton, and I'm a junior at Mid-America Christian University this year. My first question for you is, what is your writing process like?
All right. Let's drop a bomb on you.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Procrastinate for as long as possible, and then right before the thing is due, finish it. I work best under pressure. I'm very good in a crisis, very good in a trauma. I cut my finger during COVID and had to go get stitches, and going to an emergency room during now is like, could be stressful. And I was very calm. I wrapped it up. I changed my clothes. I was in my pajamas. It was very early in the morning, which is why I cut my finger, and drove myself to the hospital, like very good in a high pressure situation. So usually I'll have an idea for something. It'll float around in my brain for months. I'll take a ton of notes. I have like a legal pad right here next to me of stuff I was working on this morning, another loose leaf paper over here, a tiny notebook, another notebook, a second legal pad, notes on my laptop. I prefer handwriting as much as possible for these initial ideas, because I think computer and just distractions of a screen tends to kill things. I also think telling somebody too soon about the idea kills it. So I try to hold it in as long as possible. And then once I figure out what it is, then I sit down and start outlining. And it's really just like major chunks of like, what is this? What is this? What is this? And continuing to ask myself, what is this? And for characters, who are they? What are they doing? What do they want? Basic kind of story questions. I mean, there's 100 million books that'll explain writing better than I will. And then, I've been trying to stop procrastinating. So I make myself sit down and I work on the thing for 1 hour, because I hate it so much and it's the most painful thing in the world to sit down and write anything. But I've found that paper's way better for me because I get distracted. And then I'll walk away and I won't touch it. And then I'll come back. And then at a certain point, you just like know when it's ready, I think. And you kind of got to find that for yourself. But at a certain point, when I know that the thing is ready, usually right before it's due, I'll sit down and just knock it out. And I'm a fast writer and I'm decisive, which is helpful. But that's the thing too, just like write everything down and then edit, because most of writing is just editing anyway. But that's my process.
I love it.
Disorganized.
But you've played multiple roles. You've kind of been in those writerly roles, but you have sort of producerly experiences as well. Yeah. Maybe this is a great opportunity to talk about the contrast there, and how do you, if this describes your personal, and we're very fortunate to receive this confessional, how do you encourage others, right? What does that leadership style look like when you're helping guide other writers, right? And you have maybe a little bit more of that pressured responsibility over them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think my job right now, I'm kind of managing the most people, because I am executive producing the shows that I'm on now, which means that what I want is the thing that we're making, which is exciting.
Yeah.
And in the past, like I've been a producer, so there's like a couple people under me, but then I still have my boss. So my job as a producer, your job is really to get the job done. So you're a project manager, like a creative-based project manager. So as a producer, you're constantly following up with people. The stuff that I don't do to myself, that's like, hit the deadline, hit the deadline. I gave you this deadline, hit the deadline. Did you finish the thing? Hit the deadline. You did this wrong, do it again by this deadline. So that's my job as a producer. But as a creative, you have to like be aware of the deadline. Like you need something to aim towards, but you also just need tons of free time. Like you need to sit with the thing for days. So in terms of like working with the writers, and I do a lot of rewriting. I do a lot of like script calls. I have one producer right now and she's a more junior producer. And I knew that when I hired her, but I liked her and I like her style. And she has all the technical skills, like can cut tape, can identify good tape, which is interviews, selects. But we will sit on the phone and go through a draft of her script for like 2 or 3 hours. The longest session we had was maybe close to 4. And we'll go through the whole thing. And I'll ask her all these questions like, what are you trying to say here? Mm-hmm. What did you actually end up saying? Always like, how can we go deeper? What's the truth of this moment? What's the character arc in this story? Because you're still telling a true story. But I lead by lots of discussion. I think lots of encouragement. I have yet to meet somebody who does well being told that they are terrible and suck all the time. So I try to give a lot of affirmation with guidance, and then always give a reason for why I want something to change.
Yeah, it sounds very much like you're describing a constructive criticism, which is more of an empowering method of communication and leadership than, that some of those toxic practices that are tried and true for some.
Yeah.
Very nice. Let me cut back over to Hayley's second question here.
My second question for you is, how was your experience at improv school, and how has that experience carried over into your job today?
This was the question I was looking for earlier.
Great. Improv school, baby. I attended the Second City in Hollywood. Second City started in Chicago in the 50s, kind of an original, it was more of a tool just for actors to kind of get into characters, figure some things out. But now improv is kind of big enough where most people know what it is. I think for me, I was looking for a performance outlet when I started. I grew up playing music mostly, and I thought for most of my career that classical music was going to be it. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do with my life. So when I stopped that and realized I wasn't going to make that, I was like, well, I need some sort of outlet. So I started doing improv. I think the things that it's done for me personally, and there is not a real big separation from professional and personal. You need to develop yourself as a human if you want to develop yourself in your career, which is what I believe. So for me personally, it's really helped open up my mind, think in ways that I would have never thought to think. It's made me extraordinarily uncomfortable. It's made me embarrassed. It's made me feel dumb in public. And what that's done for me is shown that I won't die. If I say something stupid, I'm not going to die. If I have a bad idea, it's not going to kill anybody. And the only thing to do is just keep going. So I think it's removed a lot of these barriers that I thought that I had because it made me really uncomfortable and self-conscious. And by virtue of repeated exposure to that, it's made me less self-conscious. So I think in terms of then in my career, I trust my ideas a lot more. I trust myself a lot more. And I'm not afraid to show up and express an opinion. Because when somebody hires you for a job, that's because they want you and your opinions, not somebody else and their opinions. So you got to trust that.
That's fantastic. I mean, again, a testimony to those, and we're not trying to be heavy-handed about this, but that is, this nature of, improvisational, communication. It's critical thinking based. It's a combination, right, of cognition and action. Through the body, and just a wonderful, tethered in. And of course, I've co-edited a book on competitive speech and debate, and was a coach in that area for many years. And, we see the value that it creates in the students and the student competitors in the field, and how it elevates really their, it transcends, trophies and awards. It's equipping us for a greater purpose and ability to serve others in a stronger capacity, a more successful capacity.
Yeah, and I don't want to like drag this out for too long, but I also would be remiss not to say, I think improv gets this kind of, it's scary, and it seems like, oh, well, I'm not trying to be an actor, I don't need to do improv. But if we're talking just like baseline interpersonal communication, every single day of your life, you don't know what somebody else is going to say to you next. You have to be able to internalize that and respond appropriately. And that's really what improv teaches you to do. You are supposed to respond appropriately and truthfully to whatever is presented to you. So I didn't listen to any of these questions. I didn't look at any of the questions before this conversation, because it is continued practice for me to just show up and kind of see what happens. And I mean, even with you, like, we don't know where this conversation is going. Any conversation you have with anybody at all times ever is all improvised. So this is an essential life skill. It's just heightened in these schools, and it's, it's funny and it's fun to watch, and you get to like, be a space zebra or something, but all of life is improvised. So you're already doing it, whether you want to admit it or not.
Thriving the chaos. That's what you're doing. You're allowing, even this interview setting, you're breaking the standards of traditional journalism, allowing the unknown to enter the equation, and that's exciting. And I think you recognize that as a producer. Let me transition us to Caleb.
Great.
Questions.
I'm a senior at Mid-America Christian University, and my two questions for you today are: with experience as a content coordinator, what was your most challenging project? And for my second question,
okay, can you tell us about one of your most challenging projects and what made it challenging?
I think the most challenging project I've worked on so far was a rom-com podcast that came out around last summer. And I'd worked on it for about a year before that. And I think that it was just such a labor of love. So anything you love is harder because the stakes are higher. And that was the biggest kind of budget for a show that I had. It was the biggest team that I had worked with. So I think the scale of it, more than anything, was the challenge. And of course, like, external pressure to have the show be a hit. So be successful at this high level while also checking all these other boxes. But the premise of the show is kind of like individual moments within people's relationships. We would go and find couples, interview them for 6 or 7 hours at a time, find the story, and then cut the story down to fit like a 40-minute documentary style episode. And it taught me so much about interviewing. It taught me so much about relationships in life, how to talk to people, how to get somebody to open up really like personal details about their lives and their marriage. And then also in terms of like story structure, organization, just going through such huge amounts of information, packaging it in a way then that is truthful to the couple's personal story, but also highly marketable. And then you have a host who's like coming in and weaving in kind of her own story. So there was just so much to manage. And it was kind of my first time, like, both being on the original development of the idea and then executing the idea. So it was an endurance challenge as much as it was a creation challenge. But that was the hardest show I've ever done.
Well, and let me piggyback off of Caleb here. I think sometimes if we read enough information, even the fluff stuff about the entertainment industry, we start to understand cycles and production schedules. We understand that, that we have these quote unquote TV seasons, right? Or at least in a traditional sense, in a broadcast sense, you had your fall season, your spring season, and summer was empty in a dump zone or reruns or whatever. And versus, the film industry in this kind of franchise driven era of filmmaking, is organized backwards, right? It's orchestrated from a strategically designed launch point, the premiere date, to you better hurry up and make this thing and make it great. Extra loud, please. And so those kinds of cycles are a little bit more public, but maybe it's just foreign to us what that traditional cycle looks like within the podcasting industry. is there a release season? What does that look like? I kind of think about different days of the week traditionally represent a different medium's release date, right? So traditionally Friday, now Thursday evening is a film's release date. Comic books, I believe, always came out on a Wednesday, right? Books maybe have a different kind of day. What's that like? How can you relate? Tell us more about release schedules and podcasting and what kind of time you have to work on projects.
Absolutely. I think that, podcasts, since they're audio on demand, you can listen to them anytime, anywhere. It allows for a year-round production and release schedule. There are certainly different days of the week that still apply for podcasts. So I have a project upcoming with some pretty prominent YouTubers. They release their videos on Sunday nights. So the podcast is coming out first thing Monday morning, which makes sense for them, for their audience. Mm-hmm. Tuesdays are typically pretty crowded days. Since it's the most productive days at work, people's consumption was before this up. So you would have your major news shows. You would have your long form kind of political business bent weekly series released on that day. Wednesday is a little bit of a dip because people, I think, are busier in their personal lives midweek. So kind of more poppy things are on Wednesday, Thursday, and then not much happens on Friday, really and truthfully. Friday, Saturday are kind of dead zones. And then your Sunday afternoon are your longer form kind of like audio documentary. This American Life is on Sundays at 2 p.m. So something that's kind of like more personal journal, just human interest stories, are Sunday. So that's kind of like the general industry release cadence. Of course, this happens week over week because you can produce year round. And in terms of producing shows for release, I think the kind of like, it's still that more traditional production where you kind of start developing your idea and you're like, okay, I think I know what this is now. And then you pick a release date and then you run as fast as you can to get there on time. So that's the thing. That's really it. So not totally that different, but the other thing is, like, as a producer, and I know people have multiple projects at a time, but like me as a producer now, I have 3 shows that are kind of in production at the same point, kind of simultaneously. And that's like all the amount of time that I have available, because you constantly have stuff that's like, okay, this is writing. It's going to be recorded next week. I have same show, writing and recording, doing post, all at the same time, all the time. So audio is just like really compressed because you can't move kind of as linearly through a piece. You're constantly working on all of it at the same time and overseeing all of it at the same time.
One of those, I don't know, inside pieces of information that people would forget about over the years, they think about, let's say, musicians, singers, successful ones, as kind of just, swimming around in pools of money and that kind of thing. And, low to no costs, but really, in addition to tours being quite expensive, of course you make a ton of money if you're successful, right. That studio time is extremely expensive. And so you have these, you find or hear, the more you study that, an industry like that, lots of these stories of the pressure of studio spaces are expensive, recording time is expensive. Yeah. And so when stars are showing up late or, inebriated or fighting, it creates chaos for that process. Where does podcast fall on that spectrum, right? It's not quite radio, it's more controlled, but radio is increasingly digital. So we're seeing more connectivity than ever between these mass medium platforms.
Yeah, totally. I think it depends on the type of show largely. A lot of the ones that I have worked on I don't do a ton of chat shows. That's not really my thing. But that is kind of more this singer-songwriter. You have to show up and be ready to be on. Like, you have to find your way through whatever you're talking about that day for your audience. We do have the benefit of editing, and a lot of editing sometimes if in the post process, which is not like the radio DJ. And I think in many ways we're a little bit more similar to kind of like a film dubbing and ADR kind of thing, where you show up and do your line. Like if you're recording, usually the stuff I do is scripted. So that's where that's about. And then it's also the performance of it. Like, is this line being delivered in the way that I need it to be to make the story make sense, to fit the tone of where we're at right now? So that's kind of more on the film, I guess, singer-songwriter side, where you show up and you know what you're doing. But then on the radio, also singer-songwriter side, if it's a chat show or an interview show, you got to show up ready to talk through your points, and you have to make a coherent argument.
Very good. Very good. I think Caleb has one more question for us. Maybe a little bit on that sort of the back end of production processes and maybe even the marketing end. We'll see how closely it relates.
Is talk about the platforms you will be using to expose your next project on, and why do those platforms work for your projects best?
Great. So all the podcasts that I make are available everywhere you get your podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, radio.com, Overcast, any sort of like RSS curation app. I prefer Overcast as my personal usage one because you can make playlists in it. I almost never use Spotify, but a lot of people listen there. So kind of anywhere you publicly podcast, all the big podcasts are available is where my stuff goes. And I think that is a little bit more back to the types of shows that I make are meant to be public facing. They're meant to be widely consumed, and they are meant to be podcasts for the sake of podcast. Again, not like, I know you were talking about a classroom tool. I think an internal private RSS feed is super useful. I'm friends with a guy who has a company, it's called Supporting Cast. It's owned by Slate, but Supporting Cast is just for private RSS feeds. So if you want to offer subscribers premium content, if you want to have it be more of a marketing tool or even like an internal employee tool. At Wondery, I produced a podcast that was just for new hires, that they listened to 2 episodes about what things were like at Wondery and how the company worked. So that's kind of a very specific internal release, and we wouldn't publish those widely. But yeah, most of my stuff is available everywhere.
Excellent. And tell us a little bit, explain the difference between, I think sometimes we think about these mass mediums and release platforms as being in competition. And certainly they are. Yeah. But, you know, right now we're experiencing, and we talk about this in our media studies courses, the quote unquote streaming wars, right? And this idea of, you know, content is king, and we're selling the brand as much as we're selling the show, you know, on the platform. And so what I mean in relating to the audience here is, you know, your Netflix versus your Hulu versus your Amazon Prime and so on. So these large media companies in competition with one another, and they're fighting for the contracts of the content, the media, if it's not their own original product. And while you mentioned, and we might be familiar with more privatized, like paywall-based podcast series, you know, based on the certain company, whether it's maybe a Wondery or maybe some of these others that they're familiar with. It's helpful when you see multiple outlets all allowing that shared space.
Yeah.
What's the philosophy behind that? Is it will we continue to see that, or will competition continue or potentially choke out?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I don't know. The big thing about, I mean, absolutely, Spotify and Apple are the two big players. They're the heavyweights, and they are in competition. But I think on the original content side, Apple so far has not produced original podcasts necessarily. There's no Apple original series. It's not a thing that they do yet. They've been primarily an editorial tool, what they think is, you know, new and noteworthy, what they think should be promoted. And they are still the gold standard for comparing charts. Nobody else does charts like Apple does. Spotify has been much more kind of an aggregation, and because they are music-based, they have started their own studio. So they're producing their own content. So the other kind of big question related to this is, should you pay for podcasts or should they continue to be free and ad supported? Luminary was a paid subscription only private podcast network. They set out to be the quote Netflix of podcasts. And you cannot access the content unless you pay for a subscription. It's like $8 a month for however many exclusive shows. And the company is failing. And I think everybody within the industry saw that coming. Because people don't want to pay for audio. And because people don't want to pay for podcasts, I don't think you'll see these wars in the same way, because you can't lock anything behind it. Netflix can lock all their content in there, so can all the other streamers. So you want the next big thing. People are not willing to approach podcasting in the same way. So I think it's like the biggest thing those platforms have to offer right now is what's the listening experience, what's the discoverability of new shows and new content. And they're approaching it in very different ways.
There were several years where I was a SiriusXM subscriber,
Mm-hmm.
and I absolutely enjoy and appreciate the content on there. And there's just so much to offer, and I love the, I became a user where I was using the app, even though maybe it's based out of the vehicle. If you've got the app, you're just plugging and unplugging, and the show's seamlessly running, whether you're in and out of the car. But if you're not constantly renegotiating, not unlike cable, it's a steep fee. Yeah. But more importantly, as a media scholar, as a researcher, as a qualitative ethnographer, I started sampling these shows that I really valued and appreciated on SiriusXM, like on the top tier, highest production values, in all of radio, and they would be launching their own podcasts. And this is just my inner media critic. I could feel and sense and identify a kind of dramatic decline in the quality. And I think it has to do with clear but yet invisible distinctions between these two forms, right, of audio-based mass media. And I just think it's a fascinating conversation. And it's an observation that's not intended to take us anywhere. But let me take us somewhere else. Let me take us to some of these questions. I really want to. We've got students want to fit in here before we run out of time on our scheduled session. Hand slap, self.
I've been talking way too much, so that's on me.
No, it's not. Let me click. Here's Chia, and let's hear from her.
Hi, Leah. My name is Jia. Thank you for your time today. I have two questions for you. The first one is, as we know, audience feedback is very important to a producer. So how do you interact with your audience, and what do you do with negative feedback from your audience online?
Ooh, I love this question.
Good question. Interaction. So with a show, especially shows that I myself talk on, Tides of History, my history podcast with at Wondery. I have the artwork right here in the side of my frame. It's not visible, but it's right there. It's still very friendly with the host, Patrick. He and I are good friends. I would be on the podcast, even though it was his. We talk out. We send things out into the world. The only way that somebody can talk to us is by usually social media is how we talk to them. So Patrick is very active on Facebook and Instagram, and Twitter is his biggest one. People send stuff to Patrick. People by way of the show would send stuff to me on Twitter, and I'm not on Facebook, and my Instagram is locked, and I don't use my Twitter anymore. So a lot of the comments I don't see anymore, which is fine, totally fine with me. Yeah, but it didn't really bother me. I mean, the thing with negative feedback is it's so subjective. And somebody just like, it says, I think this is true of any negative feedback, whether it's from like somebody in my family, whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague, what they're saying, you also have to filter through. That's how they see the world and the situation. So it says as much about them as it does about you. With the podcast audiences, you don't have the context as to where the comment came from. So you have to kind of take it at face value and then weigh it. Is there truth to this? Did I do something that I need to maybe think about? Or was this person having a terrible day and didn't like that I talked about pirates for 45 minutes on a medieval history show? I don't know. Pirates are interesting to me, so that person can, leave, and I'm going to totally dismiss that. But if it's something that's like, hey, I really appreciated this, but this actually was a little bit weird and you might want to look into the research more, I'm like, okay, thank you so much for illuminating a blind spot, or telling me that you got bored 20 minutes in. Let me look at that. Let me actually look and see. I don't think it's, I think the biggest thing, the hardest thing is separating feedback from like a personality attack.
Yeah.
Like they're critiquing the work. It feels like they're critiquing you, and sometimes they might try to, but they're not. They're critiquing a product. Not every product is going to be incredible. You can't. There's just like statistically no way. So you have to like separate those things, I think, is the biggest thing.
I'm reminded of student evaluations at the end of each course.
There you go.
Great time to plug it, right?
Fill out your forms. I have to do my own personal evals at work this week. Actually, I've been neglecting, so it's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah. Let's hear the follow-up question from Tia.
The second question is, as new technologies have been developed, the podcast industry has been experiencing a change or evolution. What do you think of this change in the podcast industry? Thank you.
Yeah. Great questions. I think industry, the two biggest things that we've seen are so we talked about microcast, the kind of interest in short form, while at the same time demanding incredibly high production value and demanding professional quality sound. So those are the two things to balance, is how do you make something that's, on the budget with it, like, because every show costs money, every show costs, like, there's a strict budget to stick to. So how do you stick to that while also giving somebody the highest quality of that thing possible? That's always a struggle. And we're used to premium television, premium movies, even premium social media videos, highly produced YouTube videos, highly produced TikTok videos. Like the competition for quality is essential. So whatever little budget you have, if you're doing anything on your own, try to put it into production, hire the best, most professional people that you can at the budget level that you have, and just keep demanding excellence, I think, is the first step. The other big change in the industry is AirPods and people wearing headphones all of the time. There's an increased demand for different types of things. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, depending on the technology of those, whether there's a smart speaker kind of integration quality in the earbuds directly, whether we finally agree that it's socially acceptable to wear them all the time, even when you're not listening to anything.
No.
I hate it, but I think it's the future. So I think there's going to be more of like real-time information, kind of like the Google Glasses.
Glass, yes.
Yeah, just like that. So, turn-by-turn directions in your AirPods, but also like facts about whatever's around you. There's an audio company called Detour that does walking tours of places. So I think kind of integration of entertainment with reality, like TVs at gas stations. I think we'll see more of that in the audio-specific space.
Detour, this reminds me of geocaching, right?
A little bit.
Like Pokemon Go, right? Like you're going somewhere, you're getting information about it, Google Satellite, this and that.
I think we'll see more of that.
But also, I'm just going to drop one on you. Detour, one of the great B-movie film noirs of all time.
Okay, send me a list. I'll get on it.
Totally. Oh, what a rug pull that movie is. Amazing.
A rug pull.
But we don't want to detour too much more.
Okay, ready.
I've got Tommy, and then, where'd he go? And then Avery that we want to hear from in the next 11 minutes.
We can do it.
Hi, Ms. Sutherland. I hope I got these questions in on time. My two questions are, have you noticed an increase or decrease in your podcast listeners from the beginning of COVID-19?
Oh, it stole her question because I didn't preview it before the class. What a great question. I don't think we got all the way to that.
Yeah, I think, industry-wide, yes, huge drop-off. In my shows that I'm working on right now at Headspace, increase, they just launched. And we talked about kind of short form, addressing these kind of concerns right now. So highly consumable, focused on, perspective, inspiration, aspiration. So the podcast that I'm making is done really well. It just kind of it came out at a good time for that type of programming. But overall, industry is down. My own personal podcast consumption is almost at zero. I listen to maybe 1 or 2 shows a week, and very cherry pick just based on topic or interview guest.
Yeah, and understandable. All right, Let's jump back over.
And my second question is, how have you managed your podcast since the beginning of COVID-19? Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, anything other than what you shared before about, you've got this just a wonderful happenstance of you know what? It's not that. It's not. This is you. this is that ability to prognosticate, right? And this is what happens when you're tapped in to the zeitgeist, right? This is the sign of a heady mind, right? To only the elite thinkers anticipate trends, even if it's unconscious. And I really feel like we've highlighted that, and your ability to do that with this microcasting. Any additional thoughts on that?
In the physical production, virtual recording, which is the audio quality across the industry is down overall. But I think people's patience with a phone interview versus an in-person interview, like a glitchy, computerized kind of tinny sound to people's voices, we're down with it. There's more patience right now, which is interesting because before, that's enough to make me turn off an interview. But people are participating right now.
I agree, and I think, you know, as a media scholar, as someone that has a hard time shutting off the critical lens, we're you know, Zoom fatigue is real, and I'm even bugged by we'll finish this. It will be up later on my educational, you know, YouTube channel and kind of part of the course content. And it, you know, it bugs me that, you know, Zoom's only sending me a, you know, 480p quality feed and this sort of thing, because sensory is important and we know it's important, but my goodness, are we all experiencing a lot of tech overkill, even though, you know, because we're traveling less, we're more insulated, and these are our windows to the world and our windows to work for so many of us.
Yeah.
And these meetings gone wrong, right? With the open mics and the poor feeds and the jumps. I think coming out of this will be a real opportunity for those that have such a smooth and synthesized product.
I hope so.
Here is Avery with her first question.
My name is Avery Gregory, and I am a graduating senior at Mid-America Christian University this year. To start off, my first question is, what are some important skills to have when trying to step into a role such as a content coordinator or content creator?
Okay.
Ooh, important skills. I mean, basic communication skills are essential. Can you write and edit and speak concisely? I think the other big thing is having your own point of view on the world. Have something to contribute, something to add. I said this earlier, but I really believe that people hire people because they want them for that role. They want to know what you think you fit into that company, or else they would have picked somebody else. So be ready to kind of speak up, but then also know when it's time to not push back. That's been my biggest thing. I talk a lot and I'm very opinionated and I'm not shy in any way about it. I will stand up to anybody and everybody. And my big learning in my early career was learning when to stop talking and when to just do the thing that has been assigned.
Excellent.
And then my second question is, which leadership skills were most important in developing when you stepped into your role as the content manager producer at Wondery Media? Thank you. Hi.
Leadership. I think constructive criticism, like we talked about. And I think also really like, yes, develop your own opinions, develop your own taste, consume a lot of things, things that you like, things that you don't like as much, and try to figure out why you do or don't like them, because then you can express that to somebody. So it's not just an outright, no, I hate this. You can say, hey, I really don't love this, but for these reasons. And again, it's not a personality critique. You're not critiquing somebody's behavior. You're critiquing a product, a work, an output, not who they are. So those are the big things. I think the other big thing that people don't practice enough is just basic empathy. Like, somebody might make a choice that you don't agree with. They're not trying to screw you over and ruin your life. They probably had a good reason for doing it. And if you can remember that this person's a human who's dealing with a bunch of stuff externally, just like you are, they're not just this one being at work at the office out to ruin your life. There's something else going on if there's consistent, bad behavior, bad product, and you have to then be willing to address that. So also a willingness to have direct and honest conversations, things that are very uncomfortable. You as a leader need to figure out why something's not working and then fix it. You have to diagnose the problem and be willing to talk to somebody to fix the thing. But again, always based in compassion and kindness, because nobody's going to work for you if you suck. Like if you're just mean all the time, people are going to quit, which is not what you want, because then you're a bad leader.
Mm-hmm. What excellent closing advice. And I think it certainly goes both ways, right? It's that trying to understand, not be ready to just walk away if you sense that in a superior, but of course being able to cultivate those empathetic skill sets for those beneath you. And it doesn't even have to be a quote unquote employee. I mean, you work in a very collaborative industry, and I think many of us in business, in marketing, in these types of increasingly similar roles, there's going to be a lot of those collaborative opportunities and projects and networking. I mean, and these soft skills will combine with hard skills. That these are even like cliched terms now, right? Soft skills. I mean, we're in the digital age. And so many of these skills are going to be digitally based and inclined. And so anyway, what a fantastic buffet of feedback and storytelling from you, moxie and just honesty, right? This has been a terrific session. And I mean, we're blessed. We're grateful to have you here as a part of this. Thank you so much for carving out some time. Out of a scheduled day where hopefully you'll have more opportunity to recharge. We'll be super excited and encourage students to go out there and sample some of your work. I love that it's available. I think that's a powerful tool of the podcast as its own mass medium, right? It fits within other mediums, but it's its own medium, and I think we recognize it as that, but that availability is significant, and it's just exciting. I'll be excited. We'll all be excited, I'm sure, for your future successes, and appreciate you again joining us and sharing from your perspective on things.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And so for the students, I actually, if I'm talking by myself, I read the YouTube data. I know that I'm incapable of the microcasts, but these interviews always have strong readings, right? I've no doubt that students will be able to complete this without batting an eye, and appreciate that. We'll look forward to seeing how you all reflect on the ideas that Leah has presented to us here, and maybe even putting them in conversation with others as we get closer to that interviewee synthesis paper that's on deck. All this and more in our COM 4603 class together, creating social media presence and cultural movements. Thank you.